Hello, Helen, and welcome to the Confidence Conversation.
Hey, Joy. Really, pleasure to be here.
It's wonderful to have you. And today's episode is all about how well-being can build confidence at work. And today we're going to talk a little bit about your career and background, the importance of well-being and self-care, managing emotions at work, and how all of this can affect your confidence in the workplace. So I'd love it if we could start a little bit, tell me a little bit about your career journey, which started being a trainee accountant to becoming chief financial officer at ASOS.
Oh, it feels like a bit of a long and winding path, really. I'd love to say that I always had a plan, that I wanted to become a listed CFO, but that was kind of never the case, really. I did a chemistry degree and then decided that finance felt like a good job to have because everybody else, all of my friends at that point, decided that they were going to finance. So, I decided to take a trainee role, and I went into British Steel actually, which was really heavy manufacturing, very male dominated, but I absolutely loved it. I loved the excitement of just being in amongst all of the the steel manufacturing and I learned really quickly, I think, that in finance you get to see all sides of the business. You get to understand how businesses work and how they make money and how all of the different pieces fit together. And right throughout my career, I've loved that. I've never really planned to move between jobs. More opportunities have come up, and I've kind of made the decision on the spur. Does this feel something that's interesting? Does this feel something that I'm going to learn from? And mostly the big tick for me is always, are these people that I really would like to work with? So as a result of that, I've worked in quite a lot of different industries, from manufacturing to business services to retail, and then financial services as well. And every one of those different roles has been brilliant because I've got a chance to see different cultures. And I think when you're learning to be a leader, a good way to do that is to look at the leaders you work with and go, okay, I really love that about them, or those are the things that I'm not going to be when as I become a leader. So I've kind of taken the opportunities and just moved through lots of different industries, lots of different roles. And then really by complete chance, ended up moving through from CFO roles into more operational roles, CEO roles, back into CFO roles, just to see what really fit with me and what really made me tick. And then finally ended up at ASOS, mainly because I always wanted to move into fashion at some point in my career, and ended up going to work for ASOS, which was fantastic.
And you're clearly demonstrating that today in your lovely dress. I was just saying, you're looking
Yeah,
lovely.
First chance of sun coming out,
yes,
and I've got
exactly.
a sundress on.
I'm still wearing my winter woolies. And this is the first time we're recording the podcast for YouTube as well. So if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, this is very exciting. This is my sort of first foray into doing the podcast visibly as well. Now, tell me a little bit. I know you've started your own retail consultancy called Shape Beyond. I'd love to know what inspired you to start your own business.
I think I've always wanted to start my own business, to be honest. I just never had the confidence to do it, nor really had the idea of what that business was going to be. And I've worked in the corporate world for about 30 years now, and I've gone from corporate into private equity backed businesses, back to corporate into private equity. And private equity is interesting because it does kind of feel like you've got your own business, but it's not the same as being able to build something that you're really proud of. And for me, I think there's a place in the world for a new breed of consultancy, and one that's hands-on. It can add real value into businesses. And also, I can pick and choose the types of businesses I want to work with. So in the same way that my business has purpose, I really want to work with purpose-led organizations and really support them as well. So I think I got to the point in my life where, I don't know, I want to take the 30 years of experience I've got and do something that feels valuable for other people and valuable for me as well. And I think if that means I can balance my day-to-day life with managing a house with 5 children as well, then for me, you know, I'm at that stage now where that's just become so important for me to be able to do that. So, you know, that was the key reason for doing it. And I haven't looked back at all.
Amazing.
I love it.
Amazing. And I think it really ties in nicely with the topic of this conversation, actually, about health and well-being and self-care, and actually taking that time for yourself and looking at life and thinking, well, actually, am I doing what really works for me, creates a purpose for me? So, and as you know, I've just written a book. I've just literally put my manuscript into the publisher last week. And one of the topics I've talked about is about well-being and self-care, because it's such an important thing, especially for women. And I'd love to know, how important have you found it looking after your own well-being whilst navigating the world of work, sort of in the past when you've been in your corporate life?
Well, I would say up until the age of 46, I didn't manage my well-being or health in any shape or form, if I was really honest. So for me, I was very focused on, success in my mind with the career, which was becoming more and more senior. And that was at the forefront of my mind. And any spare time that I had, I really felt like I had to give that to the children. And, even my husband would say that he was, after work, 5 children, 2 hamsters, a dog, some fish, and then at some point, and I used to say, well, that's fine, but I actually then come after you.
Even that, yeah.
as well. And then so I never really did any exercise other than rushing around all days as you do. I didn't really eat very healthily. I often went through the day with coffee. Luckily, I've never smoked or anything like that, which is a good thing. But, coffee, not really eating very well. Probably didn't even really know about mindfulness, or even, I'm kind of one of those people that really I don't really like silence very much even. So for me, this busy was what drove me. And then out of nowhere, I just ended up having some back pain and ended up going to see a consultant. And overnight, really finding out I had a sort of a grapefruit-sized cyst on my ovary, a full hysterectomy, and no driving for 6 weeks. And at that point, I was at ASOS, so I was in a CFO role. I'd just done full year announcement. We were traveling in the US doing results, and all of a sudden, then out of nowhere, I was in hospital and told that there wasn't a choice. I needed to get on and do that. And all of a sudden, I think that completely rebases, I guess, your own thought about, health and well-being. And actually, I think the thing I remember most about it was in hospital. I was next to a lady who was in her 20s, who was having exactly the same thing as me, only her the tumor that was removed was cancerous for her. So she was having to have treatment, and also she'd not had any children either. So all of a sudden, for me, even though I was in that situation, you step back and you know what, I've got 5 really lovely, healthy children. Once I get over the operation, I'm in good shape. But actually, you recognise that, your body isn't, just can't be abused endlessly. And I think you recognise that, when you see, the faces of your kids looking at you and going, oh my God, you're in hospital, are you all right? That you recognise that there's so much more, I think, to life than just working. And actually, unfortunately, and ever since then, for me, I now live this world of going, there are 3 things in my life. There's work, there's family, and there's my own health and well-being. And I think if any one of those 3 things go out of kilter, then you can kind of manage it. But if 2 go out of kilter at the same time, that becomes a very difficult situation to be in. So therefore, balancing your time across each of those, I think for me, has just become so important. And it's the thing now with the children as they're growing up and, through teenage years and into university, that I try as best as I can to kind of get them early on to be really thinking about balancing those three things and how important they are, and you've got to put the time and the effort and the energy into that.
And I think, you're really lucky that you had, well, not lucky that you had that incident, but, the fact that you had the chance to then make that adjustment, because these things can happen in a split second, can't they? Health and...
I think that's the shocking thing about it. It wasn't that I felt particularly ill. I had a niggly pain in my back. That's all it was. And it wasn't, I went to see the consultant. I didn't take anybody with me. It didn't even enter my head that there was going to be an issue. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your life changes. And I think so many people who, more I speak to people, the more people that do go through, these experiences, either through, with themselves or with a family member or whatever. And it just changes the whole perspective on life.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I'd like to chat to you about is, when we spoke last time, you were talking a bit about how sometimes it can feel lonely being the only woman within a C-suite. And I wondered if you could just tell me a little bit about that and your experiences, working in fairly male-dominated environments.
Yeah, I often talk about, or people often ask me to talk about, sort of diversity and inclusion. And people always ask why there aren't more females in really senior roles. I think we've made really great progress within the boardroom, getting more women around the table, particularly in non-executive roles. I think it's much more difficult if you're an executive female in the business every day. And whether we like it or not, I think that for everybody has their own needs for what works for them in a working environment. And I am not convinced that the cultures in today's corporates have yet adjusted well enough to be able to support not just women, but also, other minority groups as well.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, I think what is tricky being a female. So if I think about when I was at ASOS, the average age there is kind of in the 20s. Very vibrant organisation. People really liked socialising and all of the rest of it. I'd just come from 10 years in financial services, 5 children, trying to manage that. I was driving into Camden every day, so I was probably doing about 2 or 3 hours of travelling. And actually, this idea around flexibility, I think the pandemic has really helped actually on the flexibility side, but this idea of being a listed CFO and not being in the office 12 hours a day, or if you finished your work, then most people were down in the pub or socializing or whatever. I think that is hard to manage because although I recognize, I think as a working parent, that you can't have it all and there's always compromises. For me, there's only so long you can go neglecting spending time with the family. So for me, I think that, for more women to move into the executive ranks, I think cultures have to become more open and inclusive. And it's not just, women, ethnic minorities, or now, if I think about neurodiversity, I've got one child with dyslexia, 2 with dyslexia, 1 with autism. And you look at them, and everybody's an individual and everybody has different needs and thoughts. And actually, organisations, unless they get better at understanding those needs and recognising that needs, each individual wants something different and being flexible around that, I think you find yourself, you have to mould yourself to fit with what the organisation is versus the organisation being flexible to you. And I think once you go too long doing that, I think you lose who you are. you almost become something that you're not. And I think for me, that's the difficulty, because life is short, and actually everybody brings their own strengths and personalities and best selves to
Yeah.
an environment. But actually, unless you enable that and allow people to flourish in the working environment, then unfortunately, I think people will just go, you know what, I'm not getting enough out of this, I'm going to
Yeah.
go and do something
Yeah.
else.
Absolutely.
And I think
Yeah.
women are brilliant, because I think purpose for us, and that feeling of fit, I think it is really important. And therefore, I talk to a lot of women who just go, I just, I didn't feel it. I might have been paid a lot of money, or I might have felt that I was successful, but it didn't feel right. I needed something else in my
Yeah.
in my life. And I
Yeah.
think women act on that.
Yeah, and I think, as you know, it's my soapbox as well. It's about changing the systems. It's not changing the women, and it's about, so many organisations were built by men for men, and it's just a cultural thing that's happened over time. And it's not that men are to blame. It's actually just that the systems are, the cultures are the way they are because of a long time, and changing those cultures can take time to change. And I think the quicker we get more women around those board tables and executive roles with that flexibility and thinking about personalised culture and stuff, I think can only be a good thing. So I know you've previously been told to be a little bit less emotional at work. How did that impact you? And do you have any tips? Because I think it's brilliant to be emotional at work and actually show that vulnerability and empathy. And do you have any tips on how to manage those emotions for the best, in the best way in the workplace?
I think I've been on a journey with this, because I think you start your career, and I've always been quite open and honest about what I think, and how I feel about things. And then I think you go through this career as you get more senior, where all of a sudden, particularly in more corporate worlds, where talking about your feelings and emotion, is not the done thing. So then all of a sudden you kind of close that down. And then you then go back through then everybody will look at you and say, oh, you're very unemotional about things. And, you need to show your vulnerability. And, you come across as a little bit cool. And you think, well, like, how do you navigate through
Yes.
this? And it's really tricky. And then maybe, just because I've got a bit older, I think then you get to the point where you kind of go, you know what, I don't care anymore. It's just going to be how it is. I think for me, I've been really lucky through my career to have access to some really brilliant leaders, some really brilliant coaches, some friends, and people who really I felt had my best interest at heart. And they would sit down and they would say, look, these are all of your strengths. So one of my strengths is passion. So I believe that if you turn your mind to anything, you can do it, because you can be tenacious and passionate in doing it. The problem with being passionate is you tend to be a little bit more on the emotional side, and therefore there's always little tricks that you can learn around things like, for me, things like, if you're going to send an email, love email, gets things done quickly, but it can be really bad, I think, for somebody who maybe is a little on the emotional side. So therefore, you go, okay, right, write your email, leave it, don't send it. Look at it the next morning, and 9 out of 10 times you won't send that email, because you look at it and go,
And I'll just pick up the phone instead.
yeah. I've learned a lot. I think for me, speaking to people just tends to be better
Yeah.
for me. I think that will work as well, because often the emotion just doesn't come through in the same way in the written form. So I think there are tips like that to maybe moderate some. My view is, if you're quite emotional like this, I don't want to stop being that. I just maybe need to like just narrow the edges a little bit to make sure I kind of stay, in what's considered kind of, the more appropriate kind of world. So I think
Yeah.
there's just some tips there. But,
Yeah.
I think the key thing is to have people around you who, you know, want to help and support and have best intentions. And you need to do that back to other people as well, because often I think in my career, not many people that you come across are not well-meaning. Most people, want to try and do the right thing, and most people mean well by what they say. Sometimes when you say something, it doesn't quite land in the way that you maybe expected to. And I think there's a piece around, I always work on best intentions, and therefore trying to accept that, even if somebody said something you think, oh, I'm not sure about that, actually by stepping back and thinking, you know what, let's come at this from they meant well in the first place. So let's have that conversation. I think it's really important. And for me, not dwelling on things. So just, if something happens that maybe I'm not sure of, or it frustrates me or whatever, it's kind of like have that conversation like straight away, because for me, that dwelling on it or not wanting to engage, I think it is not great.
Yeah.
And when I was at ASOS, when you're working with 20 somethings and dealing, I guess, with some of the challenges that they openly talk about, I've learned so much off that generation around being brave and open around what they think, and they'll give feedback, and they're brave and they're open about that, and they're not worried about their emotions. And I think there's a huge amount to learn actually from that
Mm,
generation
mm,
coming through, who seem to be in a
absolutely.
way quite a lot wiser than maybe
Yeah.
we are in the older generation.
Yeah. And I think talking about emotions, I think I'd like to, if it's okay with you, talk a little bit about sort of moving on to your personal life, because I know you very sadly had 3 miscarriages whilst you're working full time. And I think, managing that emotion around that must have been hugely difficult for you. And I know this is something else I've written a lot about, and how a lot of the time people just hide these things and then try and carry on at work. And I think that culture of just, not being able to talk about it can be very toxic. Obviously, not everybody wants to talk about it, but I'd love it if you could just share a few, bits of advice around that, if you can.
Yeah. So my first 3 children that I had no problem. I was so super lucky, um, conceiving and having the 3, and then after that we really struggled, and we had a number of miscarriages, and I was in my early 30s. I was working at the time in financial services, so in banking, so pretty male dominated, and not an environment where you talked emotion at all. Quite a brutal environment. And I was working on an international job as well, so I was traveling a lot, and I had one of the miscarriages that I had. I was going to a board meeting in Scandinavia, and I ran to get the plane. I was late, as I usually am. I was pulling like a trolley behind, because I didn't want to check it in. I wanted to carry and put it on, and got on the plane. I didn't feel that great. Got to the other end, got to the hotel, and I miscarried. And I remember being in the hotel, and you're in a hotel in Stockholm, going to a board meeting the next day, and you've not got anybody with you. You've got not really got any access to health care or anything like that, and you're in this world of, well, what do I do? I've got a board meeting tomorrow. I've got nobody around me. I can't get home, and I don't really know who I could even have a conversation with. So what do? You go, you know what? Is what it is. do the board meeting, carry on, and and that's it. And I think what happens when you do that is, for me, all I did was put that in a box in the back of my mind and closed the lid on it and went to a board meeting and pretty much pretended it hadn't happened, to be honest. And that was the only way that I could deal with it. And that is so unhealthy. That nobody should be in that position. Why couldn't I tell my boss? I couldn't tell my boss because I'd only just been promoted. I already had 3 children. So if they thought that I was trying to have another child, then I wasn't sure what the impact of that was going to be. And therefore, and also, how do you have that conversation with a boss in a Hermes tie who is telling you that you need to be less emotional? I mean, so you have this, you need to be less emotional, and you go, oh my God, how do I have this conversation?
Yeah.
And there was just nobody. And I think it's just so unhealthy. And I think those are the things that at some point do catch up on you. And when I look back at my career, I've been ever so lucky with the people I've worked with and the opportunities I've had and all of that. But there are times like that I'll never think that was fair on either myself or my husband or anybody else, because nobody should be in that position where they have to deal with something like that and don't feel that they can have that conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's so important to make those things, even if people don't want to talk about it, to know that they can, and there is a way to talk about it if they want to.
And for you to have access to, there are plenty of, I know as leaders that there are plenty of leaders who, don't like to have more personal conversations, and I get that. But you've got to make sure that there are other people around that people feel they can have those conversations with.
Absolutely.
And that can't just be women. I want to point that out, that, as I became more senior, often if there was some personal issue, then, somebody would come to me because I dealt with personal issues because I was female. I don't agree with that. I think we're all human beings, and part of leadership is to be able to empathise and understand. You don't have to know all the technicalities of what everybody's personal issue is, but you do need to be able to listen and empathise and support. And I think that, all that, I'm a great believer in all of the leadership training we put people through in terms of commercial skills or performance feedback or all of these things. Well, what about the basic human skills of listening and caring and giving emotional support? What about those? Because for me as a leader, if you get those right, that's what people remember. That's what makes the difference to an individual.
And people wonder why women leave organisations in their 40s and 50s. It's these kind of issues, isn't it? That people just feel that I'm not being supported.
Of course it is, and you see with all the conversations now about things like, menopause and all of the rest of it. I mean, we should all have that conversation at work that, we're starting to go through the menopause and want some support. Oh my God, my husband doesn't even know what the flipping menopause is. I mean, with the best, probably wants to be
and also a lot of women don't know either. And I didn't know until I hit perimenopause what perimenopause was.
Exactly, and you're trying to, it's really tricky. But in my mind, if it doesn't matter what the issue is, people just want to be heard, don't they? They just want to know that they're not a number. They're a person. They're not a number.
Absolutely.
I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings of all of my career when it comes to leadership.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the what I'd love to do, just as a touch on briefly, is about confidence, because obviously this podcast is all about confidence. And we've touched on elements of that in the conversation today. And I know we've talked before about imposter syndrome, and that you still suffered imposter syndrome even when you're at the pinnacle of your career in corporate. And I think I'd love to just talk about that briefly, because so many people see women in senior roles and think, wow, they've just done it, they've got to the top, they don't have any issues, they're really confident. And I'm really passionate about looking through the surface and saying, what is, everybody suffers from lack of confidence from time to time, imposter syndrome. I do all the time. I'd love to just finish off with any advice around dealing with the moments when you've lacked confidence and what's helped you to come through that.
I think your brain can be your own worst enemy sometimes. And I think you're right. I think, imposter syndrome isn't, it's not just women that suffer it. Many people do. And I think for me, again, it's funny, isn't it, when you think back through your career, there's certain phrases or certain things somebody has said to you that really stick in your mind. And the thing for me, and yes, I have imposter syndrome in pretty much everything I do, whether it's to do with going to see the teachers at school for one of the kids, or whether it's going to the gym and going, oh my God, everybody's watching me as I walk through the gym, or it's sitting as an audit chair in a PLC. All of those things, you're sitting there and going, oh my God, I don't know what's going to come at me, and I don't know what I'm going to say, and oh my God, like, does anybody realize that I really shouldn't be here, because I really don't know quite what I'm going to do. And then somebody once said to me, what evidence have you got that you can't do what you think you're going to be able to do? And you kind of go, well, I haven't really got any evidence at all. It's just a feeling. And I think there is that piece for me that, whenever that happens, I still come back to the okay, what evidence? I remember, I'll tell you this one. I don't think I've told anybody this before. I remember I remember we were going to do the results, one of the financial results sessions at ASOS, and you have to go in front of like loads of city analysts to present, and you have to do that. And you're reading off a script, so it's fine. You know what you're going to say. But then at the end, you'll do questions and answers, and you don't know what they're going to be. And you know that there's only certain things you can say and not to. So you're kind of like, oh my God, what are these questions going to be? And I remember I was going to do, it's one of the first ones I did. And I just remember going and sitting in the loo beforehand and putting the seat down and sitting down and sitting there going, oh my God, like, I'm not going out. I'm just like, I don't know, like, what on earth? What if I can't answer the questions? And you do have that moment where you go, well, what evidence have you got? You spend every day in the business. You look at the numbers every day. You understand how it's going to work. And, so as a result of that, somebody who isn't in the business and doesn't understand it, what is the chances that they're going to be able to ask a question that is so brilliant that you can't stand a chance of answering it? And even then, even if they do, you can always say, well, unfortunately, I can't share that information.
Or I'll get back to you, or tell me, and I can come back to you at another time. Or
yeah. So then you kind of go, there is no evidence for this irrational, oh my God, what's going to happen. And I think for me, I keep coming back to that. And I say it a lot to, one of my daughters who, she's a real perfectionist, and it's always like, well, what happens if, what evidence have you got that is true? I understand you might be worried about it, but actually step back and think about the reality, and really, is that true or not? And but it doesn't take away that the feeling still comes. It's just managing that through and making sure that it doesn't stop you doing from what you want to do.
Great bit of advice. Thank you. I hate questions too. That's my worst bit of doing any presentation. It's that kind of not knowing is horrible. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Helen. And so if listeners want to find out a bit about you and your work that you're currently doing, how can people find out?
If you want to go to our website, so shapebeyond.com, then go onto that and have a bit of a look at what we're doing. Other than that, I'm on LinkedIn as well, so feel free to get in touch, and I'd love to speak to anybody who wants to speak to me.
Amazing. And we'll put all the links into the show notes as well, so people can find. Thank you so much, Helen. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you today, and thank you for giving me your time.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you.